schema, that's a fancy word. Here would be a couple of quick thoughts. The facts are that at-risk teenagers do much better if you give them civic engagement opportunities. But I don't think we know that nearly as well about college students who are older and less, some of them are at risk in some ways, but they're on the whole less at risk. Secondly, the strategy on the whole has been to prove that this stuff works for the outcomes that policymakers care about, like cutting pregnancy, and then try to get investment in it. And it's a decent strategy. I'm not sure it's exactly a slam dunk strategy though, because it's not, the investment in various kinds of prevention and remediation in our society is enormously greater than the investment in positive opportunities. The values, I think, well, I'll come back to that at the end. I'll talk about the values. There's certainly some values in here. Before I turn to the next stream of work, I just want to throw out a caution, which is I'm a little worried that if we make the justification for civic engagement that the kids or the young adults or the old people are going to be psychologically better off, it will push us towards certain kinds of civic engagement, which are very, basically, on the feel-good end of the continuum. And I'm not sure that's completely what we want. So the striking study, there's a great book because of the power of the methodology by Doug McAdam called Freedom Summer, which is about the roughly 1,000, mostly white college students who went to Mississippi in 1963 to fight segregation. They did very, very badly psychosocially. That book is able to document that if you went, your likelihood of divorce, suicide, depression, and so on went up. But I just feel like we would be completely missing the interpretation of the civil rights movement if we said, well, it wasn't a very good intervention because the people who participated were worse off psychosocially. That's not what they were doing. And they certainly wouldn't say, oh, we went down there so that we could feel better about ourselves and have a sense of purpose. They went down there to end Jim Crow, which they did help to do. So we could drive ourselves towards sort of feel-good volunteering instead of more tougher stuff, which we might need. Anyway, that's probably my longest discourse on one of these strategies. Second, totally different stream is basically, so the first one is make the kids develop better through civic engagement. The second is make our politics better by increasing both the quantity and the equality of political voice and power. So different facts jump out at you to concern you. Like, for example, the fact that only 24% of 18 to 29s voted in the last congressional election. Happens to be exactly 24% in Illinois and 24% in the United States. So just interesting that Illinois is right on the average. And that seems bad in itself, and for various reasons. We could also think that it was bad because it means that younger people don't have nearly as much weight in the political process as older people do. Witness the debates about Medicare and so on. But the other problem is it's not just a random 24% of the young population who vote. It's a very stratified group. For example, you're much more likely to be voting if you're a college student than if you're not. In fact, it's twice. So in the last election, if you were a current college student, you had about a 28% chance of voting. But if you were not in college at that same age, you had about a 14% chance. So so we focus in my shop a lot on the 14% turnout rate for non-college young people and asking how that can be changed. That's the fact. The underlying value is the idea that more participation and more equitable participation would lead to better policy. The strategy, I think, on the whole is that we pretty much know things that will work to increase turnout. Discuss current events in classrooms, teach political skills and knowledge, give kids an opportunity to actually act on political issues. You will see increases in their turnout. That's been shown. So that's basically the strategy. I think the biggest strategic problem, though, is not so much how do you do that if you're the teacher and you've got 20 kids. The biggest strategic question is how can we get that embedded into curricula, into schools, into colleges, because it's not clear that the powers that be are totally interested in increasing the participation of young people. That they got elected with the people who already vote. A quick note is that we're talking about totally different inputs and outputs than we were before. Before we were talking about, classically about, volunteer service to get kids to feel better about themselves so they don't get pregnant. Now we're talking about voting, so that we can vote out the mayor. And they're totally different because it's very unlikely that voting would make you psychologically better off. It might be a manifestation that you're more comfortable with yourself, but it's certainly not. Nobody would say that the strategy for making kids do better in adolescence is to get them to vote. I think, so that's actually a caution. Are we talking about, is there a tension here? I think another caution is we have to be a little careful about putting all our emphasis on raising the turnout of students at four-year universities, because they're all, I realize UIC students are demographically diverse in an impressive way, but they are a four-year university, and so they're on a pretty good path, relatively speaking. And the concern would be if we raise their turnout, but we're not doing anything for the kids in the rest of Chicago, we're just actually increasing gaps. So anything you guys do, I think, should be concerned about the broader issue, not just your own students. Right, I think I'm gonna just mention a third, but not talk about it very much, which is civic engagement as character education, as virtues, as education in virtues, especially the public and civic virtues having to do with how we relate to other people. So we can talk about that in questions if you want. I'm going to basically skip it because I'm watching my watch. I want to get to another one, which I think is more explicitly in what you're doing, Joe, which is deliberative democracy is another project. And you can see this explicitly in, you guys at IPCEE have made grants for discourse projects, as you call them. The website that they're unveiling is full of discourse and discussion. And you know, the underlying issue, deliberative democracy is another field of practice, and the underlying idea is politics is not all about just registering what you want and demanding what you want. Politics really is also about figuring out what you want by talking to other people. Politics is deciding what you should want or what you do want. But that sounds nice, it sounds pleasant thing to say, but of course it doesn't necessarily go very well, because when we communicate with each other about what we should want, one of the things we can do is turn each other into violent racists by the way we present them, by the arguments or the speeches we make, or things can go very badly. So deliberative democracy is basically the movement that says if we can have a good conversation, structured the right kind of way, the right kind of civility and balance and evidence, we'll get people to end up in a better place, to reach better conclusions. And so I think a lot of the civic impetus in civic engagement is trying to use the university, the classroom, and the structure of the university to provoke better discussions. Now here's another one though, because some of my friends, particularly a professor I really admire in Minnesota called Harry Boyd, have made it a critique of deliberative democracy. Actually, there are a lot of critiques, but this particular critique is a critique which says deliberation is basically about talk. It's basically about communication. We use words like input or voice or discourse when we're talking about deliberative democracy. But surely there's more to civic engagement than that. And part of what it leaves out is actual concrete work. So when Jane Addams created Hull House, she had a lot of discussion in that place. She had people coming in and talking. But they also did stuff like, one of the first things they did was build a museum devoted to the peasant art of the communities who were represented in this neighborhood. So, and making that museum is a physical thing. You actually carry this stuff into the rooms. And so the critique of deliberative democracy is that it divorces talking and thinking from actual work. And the argument is those things should be connected. So this is why your placements in nonprofit organizations and your volunteer opportunities and your use of arts and media need to be connected to discussions. And I think in some ways you're already doing that. All right, let me get to basically my last kind of stream of thinking. I'm going to take a little longer over this because I think it's so relevant to what we've been talking about since I got here. And then I'll have some wrap-up thoughts. So my last stream of work that I see going on is an effort to, in one sense, to deal with the information overload of the 21st century. Or another way to put it is to try to turn information into knowledge or even wisdom, and to use the university and students as part of that process. I don't know if anybody saw this article in Science magazine the last month about how much information there is in the world, but it turns out that did anybody see this? If you took all the information that we human beings have created and you entered it on high density compact disks, and you took the disks out of their sleeves and you just piled the naked disks one on top of each other, it would go past the moon. So we have quite a lot of information, and in some ways you could sort of look at a university like this one, a big university, and say, you know, you guys produce information every day, but you already have a whole lot of that stuff. There's some things we don't know that we would like to know, but we certainly have plenty of information. It makes me think of you know, the great poet T.S. Eliot's words, which he wrote in 1934, when that stack was a whole lot smaller than it is now. But listen to his words from 1934. Where is the wisdom we have lost in knowledge? Where is the knowledge we have lost in information? So that would be the question here. Where is the wisdom we have lost in knowledge? Where is the knowledge we have lost in information? The problem with information by itself is it's basically inert. It's sitting on those CDs. It doesn't produce motivation to do anything, judgment to decide what to do is right, what's right to do, decisions, action, power, let alone beneficial decisions or wise actions. What do we need to solve that problem? We need people to engage with the information. And, you know, engage is a little bit of a buzzword, but here are some things I think you do when you engage with information. You discuss the information with other people, including people who have different values, backgrounds, and ideas and interests from yourself, to make some common sense out of it. You use your knowledge to do important public work, to run organizations, or to address a public problem, or to make some public statement. And when you work together with other people on these projects, again, it's a cycle because you actually generate information and knowledge and understanding. You also, when you engage with information, if you're wise, you recruit other people into the conversation about that information, including young people, so that you're ready for another generation, and including people who start without any interest in the topic, because we don't come ready interested in important things. You know, Medicare is important to all of you, but a fairly large number of us don't know that. And so one of the things you do when you engage with information is you make it interesting to people who don't find it interesting, because they should be part of the conversation. Now, I start with the bias. I'm happy to debate this because I don't think I'm necessarily right, but I start with the bias that we still need institutions to help people engage with information to produce knowledge. The critique of that is serious and believable. I mean, we should take it seriously, which is that we don't need institutions as much because now we've got Facebook and Twitter and other kinds of loose networks, and people can process information together without institutions. So I don't know if that's false, but I would just ask these questions. Can a loose voluntary network online, like a Twitter, recruit people in who aren't already interested? Because we need everybody in. You know, we need the kid in the back of the class with his baseball cap on backwards, not paying attention, as well as the kid up in the front who's interacting with the teacher. So is Twitter going to get the kid in the back in? Can these kinds of networks consistently create diverse conversations in which people who are different from each other interact? Can the network as a whole be accountable to its members in a fair way? So if it goes awry, can they reclaim it? Can these networks hold governments and businesses accountable, not just in the short run, but in the long run? Can they stay there? I mean, we know they can in the short run because that kind of a loose network just brought down the government in Egypt. But can it hang in there when they start to struggle with the Muslim Brotherhood right in Egypt? Not clear. And can they be resilient against deliberate maliciousness? Because a lot of the really good online stuff works well, but it's like because nobody's wrecked it. I mean, you mentioned the White House online deliberation. 2 of those were very easily and quickly destroyed by people whose goal was simply to destroy them, just by massing lots of participants who just wrote obnoxious things and they killed the conversation. So can a loose network be resilient against deliberate efforts to destroy it? Now, I want to say, there never was some great age of democracy where we had a wonderful conversation that included everybody and they were all equal and so on. We all know that. But we did used to have something, despite, in some ways, we may be in our best moment now. I mean, there's been a lot of progress. But we did have something that we've lost without replacing it. And that was a set of institutions that saw it was in their interest to recruit in new people, give them some skills and knowledge, and get them interested in public affairs, digest information for them, encourage them to some extent to reach their own conclusions, and then at some points bring them into discourse with people in other institutions. What am I talking about? I'm talking about metropolitan daily newspapers, which even 30 years ago, 65% of Americans said they were getting.